my name is Tayeb Hassan. I'm the co-founder of Nafsi Health. And Nafsi is an online mental health platform licensed by the Dubai Health Authority. We have a team of over 50 psychologists and psychiatrists we work with, and we deliver mental health services. And for the past 2 years, we've worked on a division called Nafsi Maritime that focuses on providing mental well-being solutions for seafarers and the maritime industry.
Hi, my name is Ilyas. I'm a clinical psychologist, and part of my work is I do assessments for mental health issues. I also provide psychotherapy, and at Nafsi, we also do a lot of corporate well-being. So that includes talks and trainings and workshops and seminars as well.
So obviously the past 4 months have been quite difficult for various reasons. Different industries felt it differently. But what we saw at Nafsi, we actually saw it as an opportunity to capitalize on now mental well-being and mental health safety became a priority for a lot of the companies. But in general, we saw a much higher acceptance towards mental well-being solutions. And we doubled down. We offered a lot of workshops and webinars to be able to kind of educate people on the need of mental health resilience in particular during this period. And different industries reacted differently, but the general theme is that this is now a priority.
So from a clinical perspective, what I've noticed is that something, as Tayeb said, that used to be in the distance became a lot more significant, more immediately. So companies needed to care a lot more about what we call the human factors, because it wasn't just about work anymore. It wasn't just about work performance anymore. People were genuinely scared. There was a lot of uncertainty, and they were not really sure how to tackle this, not just for themselves, but considering we all live in communities and societies, trying to understand how to explain it to family members abroad who might be worried, trying to figure out how to explain it to your kids. How do I tell a child that everything is going to be okay, or how do I answer the questions that they're asking me? So there was a push on an organizational level to provide some sort of psychological support, but there was also an encouragement to seek out one-on-one support with psychologists as well. That's what I observed over the last few months.
Okay, so the challenges that companies particularly face when they come to us is dealing with the uncertainty, right? Like of the situation, of being able to provide their employees and their families a sense of comfort that they're being taken care of and operating normally. So an example of this is that we saw a lot in frontline workers. A lot of the organizations that operate frontline workers, and I include Maritime there and seafarers there, actually reaching out to us saying this is the time we need to be there for our employees and for their families. And not to say that they weren't doing that before, they were, but now they're actually seeking out immediate things that they can put in place. And that's where we kind of stepped up as Nafsi for Maritime, or Nafsi, is to be able to kind of fill that gap immediately. Provide something in the short term while using this as an opportunity to plan for the long term and to be more preventative than reactionary in the future. So it's all about building resilience and managing stress, managing anxiety, managing a lot of those things as an organization. Those were the challenges that they came to us with.
So one thing that I always explained to companies whenever I was asked to speak to employees was that there is going to be a very natural dip in performance during very difficult times, and that is to be understood, and we need to normalize that. As a very famous psychoanalyst once put it, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is a normal reaction. So there are people who are going to be struggling, because one of the things that goes out the window quick is sleep. And once sleep is completely disrupted, when there's uncertainty, when there's a constant threat of danger, then that has a rollover effect on physical and mental health. And so that dip in job performance is to be expected. So one thing that I've always recommended companies keep in mind is that for the period of time that we're going through this really difficult situation, that is one thing that if they can normalize for their employees, it really takes the pressure off. Because it's really difficult to be thinking about having to excel at work when you're also just thinking about surviving and making sure everyone around you is okay. So we know that within maritime, there's many audits that companies have. In a scenario like this, having something like a fatigue audit would also be really important, because the idea that we can just continue operationally in any industry, but especially in maritime, which was very high risk during this entire scenario, is something that would not be the best approach to take, but instead having stages of returning to normalcy for the crew in specific, because when they've been in that state for months and months and months, and there's stress that's been that they've been holding in their body for a very long time, that doesn't just go away. That requires some sort of debrief, that requires some sort of intervention, some sort of time off. So I think the most important thing for the sake of their mental health is going to be that we return to normalcy in stages where possible. So I want to stress here that even before this crisis that we were in, within the maritime industry, we know that there are much higher rates of mental health issues. This is even before any of the crisis happened. And you see that even compared to other high risk groups like firefighters, for example, there is a heightened risk of people struggling with depression, with anxiety, with much more severe mental health issues. So because it's quite difficult to be out at sea for months at a time, and the one thing that people don't consider that can be really difficult is the monotony of being at sea, because we talk a lot about overstimulation these days, but a lot of people out there might be struggling with understimulation, given that there's not much changing in the horizon or it takes quite a long time to change. So I know it might be dismissed from time to time as a soft issue, but considering that it is human beings who need to do this work properly, it is human beings who need to take the appropriate decisions. Good mental health can determine whether someone is able to properly carry out their duty. It is also an issue of safeguarding, so that if someone is in the best state of mind, we know that we would have the least errors on board in any ship. So it might sound like a soft issue, but it's a core issue, because if the human beings doing it are not in the best state possible, then the work is also not going to be in the best state possible. There are many audits that seafarers or the maritime industry in general goes through. I think within those, it's important to add something like a fatigue audit. Doing mental health checkups in general is going to be really important. Screening for mental health issues so that you're able to check in on them or capture them before they become extreme, because that's when you need much more intense intervention. So if you can catch it early, that's important. The other thing is that, to just go off of something that Tayeb said as well, that when seafarers can see that companies are actually contributing to their well-being, to their mental health, it doesn't just do a great job for that company, it does a great job for the role of being a seafarer. Because if people know that this is a role that I can go into where I will actually be looked after, where I feel my family will also be looked after, there will be support for me, there will be support for my family, it does a great thing to rise the entire industry, no matter who takes the lead on that. So I think it's not just about checking in as a result of a crisis, but about being more proactive in creating a healthier space for these people. Because one thing that's very important to keep in mind is that trust is not built in times of crisis. Trust is built in times of comfort, because so that when you know that you're going into a crisis, you trust that you'll be taken care of. Because it's not really possible to build a skill when you're in a state of crisis. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Digital mental health platforms do have an advantage in reaching people that traditional clinics and traditional psychologists won't be able to reach. And this is why we built Nafsi for Maritime, is because we thought we had the capability by being online platform first. And now that the industry is adopting, like industry-wide, they're adopting internet and accessibility on their ships, it's the perfect time to be able to use that bandwidth specifically for access to support, right? Is to actually be not just for social media, but it can be used for good. It can be used to support the isolation that the seafarers feel, or the anxiety levels, or particularly during crisis. So it definitely positioned Nafsi to be able to reach those people, but the maritime industry as a whole was behind when it came to prioritizing mental well-being, even though the seafarers and the industry is at more risk of mental health issues. So it was a double-edged sword. Now it's time to do something about it, right? Because we have accessibility, we know what solutions work. We can now do more research when it comes to this. We can reach, like for research, it was difficult to try and go and send a psychologist to go on a voyage with the seafarers to be able to get the data they need to understand how they can help. But now with phones, we can actually send questionnaires, we can get data. We were able to now build solutions that are specific to the industry. And one thing that was pretty cool to also imagine is that we were able to also provide couple therapy on the platform, right? Via the platform on ships. So now actually the seafarers can work on their marriages and can actually fix their issues while they're on voyage, because we know that's a big problem that they face as well, being away from their families. So it opened a lot of doors to be able to fill the gap, to have the industry catch up with the rest. Aviation is very well-known assessments. There are specific assessments for aviations. There are specific solutions out there for aviation. And I think it's time that the industry, maritime industry, catches up and overtakes the rest. So definitely, digital solutions is the only way for the industry to be able to ensure that their seafarers and their crew always have access to the support they need. And we're lucky to be one of the providers of that. So the maritime industry is facing a shortage of seafarers. And one of the reasons is because the lifestyle of a seafarer is no longer being looked at as the right lifestyle, right? Or the best lifestyle. We have first generation seafarers that are actually pushing their kids away from the industry. And that is when the people that have lived through it, and in let's say 30, 40, 50 years ago, that actually benefited from the values that they got back then, are now not pushing their own kids towards it. Of course, that will lead to a continuous shortage. And that's where it really needs to trigger a change of the human factor in the maritime industry. I think every other factor has been perfected, commercial, operational, audits, but the human factor have been neglected. And that needs to change if you're ever gonna, incite new generations to want to be seafarers, like to have the respect, to get respect in the community and society, like firefighters and other frontline workers do, to get access to solutions like this that becomes normal. The mentality of mental health being soft issue has to change to be able to actually attract people that feel they're supported when they choose a career of being a seafarer. So I think identifying the issue now and identifying this is a problem is the first step. Now let's work on providing the solution and changing it. So when we started as Nafsi to build this division called Nafsi for Maritime, we partnered with the University of Emirates, which is one of the leading psychological universities in the UAE. And the partnership was to do research in seafarers' mental well-being. They realized, as well as us, that there wasn't a lot of research or any that was prominent enough to build any solutions on top of or to actually make any hypotheses from. So we said we're actually going to send our own psychologists to the seafarer ships to interview them, to capture data. But a lot of our research that we saw online that's from there is that we know that 1 out of 4 seafarers in the region are impacted by either depression, anxiety, or stress, or a mental health issue, which is a higher rate than the normal population. We also know that the good thing is that there has been 50% more research since COVID. So COVID was the first sort of inflection point that this is an industry we need to do more on when it comes to mental health. And I hope that this crisis now will really accelerate this further, because this is not going to be the last crisis we're going to deal with. Even if you compare it to the other things between COVID and now that's been happening, there is a real need to now go into being more preventative, into being more proactive than reactive. And that's the biggest takeaway from the research we've done so far.
When we attempt to show the value of well-being for seafarers, we often provide numbers of how much it costs when people are not experiencing well-being. But I think one thing that is not possible to calculate is how a person feels being in an organization or in an industry that they feel really cares about them. And the magnitude by which it exponentially multiplies the benefits of just being in that industry and how that industry and that organization is spoken about. So I do think that the effects of this go beyond simply this is how much you will not lose, but there's so much that you will gain in terms of reputation, in terms of well-being, in terms of what you're providing, the people who work for you, and then the families that they work to support as well. I think for the industry, just one observation I'd like to make is that media is usually a pretty good way to see where the cultural values are. And I was just discussing this earlier that in the 20th century, you had Popeye the Sailor Man, who was this huge figure. So you know that the way that people looked at people at sea was very different. It was kind of romanticized. There was this um, heroism around it. We don't have an equivalent of that in the 21st century. So as my field grows and as we learn more and more about human factors, I think we become less and less human a little bit when we talk about it. So I think going beyond just trying to understand human factors, actually understanding how we can make the field look as human as possible. Because at the end of the day, I think few of us can imagine what it might be like to be at sea for 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, 13 months. And definitely, we probably can't imagine what it feels like to be in a state of crisis where you are isolated, there's danger around you, and you are helpless. You can't do anything. So it's a very difficult, high risk role in that way. And I think acknowledging the human beings who go through something like that is going to do wonders for people looking at the maritime industry in a different way.
While this crisis has put a spotlight on the lives of seafarers and how difficult it is, and it's primarily focused, the spotlight is on the Arabian Gulf, but there are thousands of other seafarers that are still isolated, continuing going from Brazil to China, going from America to China, that weren't in the Arabian Gulf, that are still going through the issues that they had before. And we hope that we understand that seafarers are human beings and not just carriers of whatever the ship is carrying. And that's what we need to start prioritizing, and hopefully like being able to provide more support is going to be the first step to actually humanize that field.
Listen to what the workers actually need because they know better than anyone else what it is that they need, and then we can do our best to provide support where possible. So that's what I'd say.
An advice that I would give to a ship owner in the UAE right now is to, whenever they're making a decision, whether however big or small, is to consider the crew and the seafarer well-being and welfare and what impact that might have. Is it going to impact my crew negatively? Is it going to impact my crew positively? And have that as part of their decision matrix whenever they're making those decisions or investments or purchases or whatever it may be, is to keep in mind your crew's welfare. We mentioned today that like the push is for organizations to be more preventative, more proactive than actually await an incident to react to. And some of the ways we're helping a lot of organizations do that is through training their staff for them to be the first line of support and response before an incident comes up. So we do mental health first aid trainings and refreshers on that. Immediate access, like crisis lines that are actually monitored by us as a third party, so it's not part of their employer, so confidential lines that employees can feel they can reach out to without having to worry about their livelihood. And culturally is doing a lot of culture analysis of everyone in the organization, both onshore and offshore, to identify the gaps that can be fixed. So there's a lot of consultancies that you can get, because if you have access to the data within your organization and know what's going on, then you're able to take action. So those are very simple ways that an organization can actually position itself to be more preventative and more proactive than reactive. For any ship owner that doesn't know where to start when it comes to prioritizing mental well-being for their seafarers, for their onshore staff, for all their employees, that's where we come in as Nafsi for Maritime. We help consult, we help provide solutions, and provide a turnkey offering for an employer to be able to ensure that their seafarers and employees' mental well-being is being taken care of. From one-on-one sessions to assessments, questionnaires, consultancies, crisis lines, couple therapy, everything, we will figure out the right solution for them and provide it to them. So Nafsi for Maritime. And as part of our partnerships with Emirates Shipping Association, we're also providing all members a special discount for all our services, and that could be a way to get started.